excited about this setup. I kind of want to like go like this, and yeah.
It's nice. Just a little lounge.
Seth, so thanks for talking to me.
Oh, for sure.
So I think we have 15 minutes to talk, even though the clock says 25, so maybe I take advantage of that. No, we have 15 minutes to talk through the entire history of Lyft in New York, which is actually, only 2 years, which I'm sure feels incredibly long to you. When you came on board, you were the first local hire. Can you just talk about sort of where Lyft was in New York at that point?
It was non-existent. When I first started, I remember I was telling my parents what I did, and they looked at me because just like, what are you talking about? And I said, Uber's competitor. And it dawned on them, oh, okay, this is what he does. But since that time, we've grown so much that finally we're in a place that we actually are growing faster than Uber. And when you say Lyft, everyone knows. In terms of where we were nowhere. We hadn't really started, we hadn't grown, and as you've noticed, there were no other employees besides me.
So I'm sure that involved a lot of different things, especially for those first few months. But as you said, if you were nowhere, what was sort of the first priority in terms of actually getting somewhere?
Drivers. We needed to grow supply. If you don't, you can have the product, but if you don't have the actual product offering, which is our drivers and getting people around, there's not much you can do. So my primary focus was how can we very quickly grow our driver base? And of course, because we're a dual-sided market in B2P, we then also, as we're growing that and as we kind of fixed that funnel, we call it, we had to really push hard to grab as many passengers and show them why the value prop that we offered was interesting, dynamic, valuable to them.
Because the challenge that you're alluding to there is that if you bring on all these drivers but you have no passengers for them, they're not going to stick around for very long.
And vice versa. If you bring on all these passengers and you offer them $50, so every ride free that you have in New York City for a month, but there's no availability to get rides, well, it doesn't do you much good either.
And so, I think this is a problem that people talk about all the time. Was there sort of anything that you learned during that process about how you manage those two sides, or is it really just like, nope, it's just really hard and you have to, address both sides?
I think the one lesson that I really learned was iterate, iterate, iterate. Never be worried about trying new things. Never be worried about going at something, and also when something isn't working, when a strategy isn't working, start pivoting quickly and start finding something that does. And then, after that, it's just a lot of hard work. There's no replication for just really hard work and pushing forward. But I learned very quickly that you have to start building a team of interested, intelligent people very quickly who can help you manage this, because there is no job you can do alone.
So, on that subject of iteration, I think one of the things, I was just looking at some of the other interviews you've given about this process, and one of the things you've also talked about is that the messaging in New York had to maybe be a little bit different than it had been in other markets. What is that difference?
I don't know how many people here live in New York City, but I assume many. And New Yorkers are just generally very different in the values that they hold, especially when it comes to their time. And transportation is just a function of time, truly. So when we saw what Lyft was in the rest of the country, the value proposition we could give was, we're trying to reduce vehicles on the road. We are really interested in environmental issues. We're very interested in spending more efficiently and making sure that our generation and that all of us can really kind of not have to own more but get to do more. And that was great. And that works in New York too, to an extent. But New Yorkers need to move around faster than anybody else. They need the cleanest, best, most efficient, cheapest ride. So when it came to New York City, we kind of had to meet New Yorkers where they were and not necessarily where we wanted them to be met. And I think that was a really important kind of growth moment for us. We were like, oh, okay, so we're going to have to get these guys to take the rides on their terms. And we started building towards that, and we've been tremendously successful since then.
How did you figure that out? Was that like interviews or just testing or?
Testing, focus groups, articles that were coming out around the time of our launch about who is this new weird ride-sharing group, and what's with the pink Lyft mustache, and what do we care about this? And then just kind of figuring out, as I said before, iterating over different processes, seeing which was most successful, and leaning into our success.
So, just as a way to sort of see how that resonates with the people in the room, how many people in the room have taken a Lyft, say, like in the last couple of weeks?
Be honest.
All right, so we've got, maybe a good half of the room.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you.
So, I mean, for the people who haven't, I mean, what would you say is sort of the core? I mean, that obviously there are people have a lot of different options when they want to ride. Like, what is it about Lyft at its core that should convince people to, get a Lyft instead of anything else?
Well, once again, it really depends on the individual and what their kind of features are what they're geared towards. I think that you should use Lyft because it's the best from an experience perspective. And we discussed this, earlier backstage. We're very focused on all sides of it. We're focused on making sure that the UI experience is perfect, so that when you touch it, it's not annoying. It doesn't fat finger through. We're obsessed with making sure the ETAs are the lowest, and we're obsessed with making sure that when every passenger interaction we have is great, not just the 50%, which is the ride, but everything around it as well, including support, including the communication between you and the driver. And we spend so much time making sure that our interaction with drivers are great. One of the things that we're always hearing is, oh, your drivers are so much nicer, oh, your passengers are so much nicer. They're not necessarily patently different people. A lot of drivers in New York City drive from multiple apps. I think it's the interaction with the app that gives them the real difference. So when I hear from people, oh, your drivers are nicer, I really do think that is a function of the time that our staff spends with drivers and on drivers, and the time that we spend on the kind of app's feeling. And if I could mention one other thing, and one reason that I use Lyft and really kind of join the company, is because I really do believe in the message of removing vehicles from the road. It's not necessarily about having all the rides or all the vehicles. It's about spending in a better way. One thing we talk about a lot as a company is that annually we spend in a country $2 trillion on transportation. That's on 240 million passenger vehicles. And if you lined all those vehicles up, you'd cover 6,000 square miles. That's larger than the state of Connecticut. And that's a problem, and that's something we're trying to fix. And if you're anything like me, you believe in a company and want to interact with a company that has that type of value system.
So, I mean, you talked about, the drivers and bringing them on board. I'm curious, like, when you came, when you were getting Lyft off the ground here, I mean, is there sort of a pretty straightforward playbook for how you recruit drivers, or was it sort of just like, all right, just like, do whatever you can?
Those were definitely the marching orders. On the ground, it becomes a little more difficult. One thing that we figured out very quickly is, unlike everywhere else where we could run our own background checks and offer our own insurance, we had an organization, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, the City of New York, and they do a great job regulating their drivers. And it's very important to the city that anybody who gives any type of passenger ride, a paid ride, is a TLC driver. So very quickly we learned and started building towards something we had not built towards in any other region, and still haven't. New York City remains to be our only professional market.
Well, it's interesting that you touched on that because, as I understand it, you actually came from you worked for the Taxi and Limousine Commission, right? And I know there's, obviously a lot of discussion around regulation, both in this, I think, nationally, internationally. In New York, is that pretty much a settled issue, or are there sort of ongoing discussions around that?
Well, I would say just to start, regulation generally and working with the legislature is just, it's ongoing. It's something that you'll be doing for the entire period of time that you have a business or we have cities. So, we're always going to be continuing to work to make the ride experience better. And I think that that's the same kind of initiative that the city has. They want to make things safer. They want to make things more efficient and better for drivers and passengers. So we're very aligned on that. And just to make a larger point, nationwide, over the past 4 years, we've worked with legislatures to pass ride-sharing regulations in like 30 states. We'll continue to do so. When it comes to New York, we still want to bring peer-to-peer ride-sharing to the state, and it's something we're working very hard on and something we're working with the state to make happen.
So how soon do you think that's going to happen?
It's hard to say. It's one of those things. We have a team on the ground dedicated to speaking with the legislator to make it happen. Everything's based on the legislative session reopening, which doesn't happen for a few months from now. But it's part of the process, and it's part of the reason we have full teams dedicated to it, and it's part of the reason we're going to keep building towards it.
So one of the things you also said at the beginning, if I heard you correctly, was you said that Lyft is growing faster than Uber now. Is that?
In terms of how our growth trajectory has gone, yes, we are.
And growth trajectory in terms of rides or in terms of drivers or all of the above?
The most comfortable note I'm going to give on that is rides.
Okay. And I mean, and that's for New York specifically or overall?
Overall.
Okay, great. So one of the things we were talking, in the messaging, I'm jumping around a little bit because we have a couple minutes and I want to hit a bunch of different things.
We're going to get there.
We're going to get all these things. Is also in terms of the messaging, I've noticed, so I live in Williamsburg, and there are a lot of signs around that say, like, use Lyft for your commute. I mean, is that something that people are actually doing on a regular basis?
Oh yeah, that's some of our biggest business. Morning and evening commute is as big as weekend nights. We see a lot of people getting to and from work based on that. New York City, of course, is also bigger than its Manhattan. It's full 5 boroughs, and there are a lot of underserved areas that we've been helping to kind of fill the gap in. In particular, one thing that we're very excited about, and some of you may know about, is Lyft Line. And that is the product that allows you to share the ride with people that have very similar routes for less money. And that product is now more than half the rides that we have in New York because people are so interested in getting these cheaper rides. And that primarily happens during the commute hours because people want to get to work quickly, efficiently, comfortably, but they don't want to pay a lot for it, understandably.
And you guys actually just announced, or recently announced, you're doing memberships as well, right? For Line specifically.
We're testing it out in the month of November in a few markets. Part of having this product line and having these really dedicated people, passengers, is that we don't want to make it prohibitively expensive. And when you're using it on a daily basis, we need to find a way to make that happen. So this is us trying to solve around that.
I mean, so when you say that, okay, we're testing something like that, I mean, at that point, does that mean that's very likely to become available to everyone at some point, or is that really mean, okay, we're testing this and we really aren't sure if this is something we're going to commit to?
Well, personally, I hope so. No. It's really hard to say whether it'll be something that'll be a full rollout. I think when I say testing, I truly mean that. We don't even have a full month of data. We need to kind of see how it's going to work. We need to see who's using it and how we can make this very cost efficient. So, we're testing it, and I expect that if it is successful, it would be rolled out quickly. But, it's one of those things that's always ongoing.
So looking ahead, I mean, one of the things I think you've already touched on is sort of how dramatically you guys have grown, I mean, both in terms of a presence, but just, as a team in New York. What are you spending most of your time on nowadays, and what is sort of the things that worry you as you sort of think about 2017 and excite you?
Well, I mean, I'm excited for October. October, we're on pace to do 17 million rides nationwide. That's crazy. Those are numbers I couldn't have predicted when I was first starting out. And what am I kind of focused on? Dual-sided marketplace growth. It's a really kind of ever-changing kind of ecosystem of finding how to keep drivers intrigued and keep them on the platform, and the same with passengers. And you can't just do one at a time. You got to spin both plates in the air, which means spinning a lot of other plates. So my main focus is making sure that we have a stable, kind of sustainable growth over time that doesn't bankrupt us, but also kind of keeps us in a good place. So what I'm focused on is growth. What I'm excited about is growth.
And I mean, part of that on both sides, right, is you were talking about keeping both passengers happy, drivers happy, which I would imagine that as it gets bigger, becomes harder because you can't necessarily spend as much time with each driver, and worry as much about passenger experience. I mean, how do you make sure that's still a priority?
You just have to constantly kind of take a step back and kind of reorient yourself and make sure you're focusing on it. One of the reasons that we have a driver meet with a staff member every single time when they get onboarded in New York City is that we want to maintain that level of excellence. And it's the same reason that we're growing these really amazing teams locally. I started as the first one. I think there are 19 nationally. It's the same reason we're growing this huge support network that is taking down the time it takes to talk to somebody every day. And we're all very fixated on making sure that we make this the best experience and taking that step back and saying, hey, are we actually focused? Do we have resolve? Can we make this happen?
So we're almost at time. Very last question is, you talked about this vision of just, fewer cars on the road. Do you feel like that we're sort of very clearly on that trajectory now, or are there other things that you want to see happen, for that to really be our future?
I mean, there are so many things that have to fall in place to definitely make that the future. I would say that from where we're building, from everything we're hearing from the legislators, from everything that we're hearing from tech groups and all of the old school industries like car manufacturers, we are moving towards a future that is going to be possible. Now it's up to us to kind of go out and grab it.
All right, Seth, thanks so much.
Thank you.